The gas station sat alone on the edge of the highway, lights buzzing like tired insects against the dusk. The air smelled of gasoline and hot asphalt, the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes even after you leave. I remember the way the gravel pressed into the soles of my shoes when my mother's car rolled to a stop, how the sky was already thinning from blue to gray. She told me to wait by the vending machine. She said it casually, like she was asking me to hold her place in line. My name is Emily. I'm 30 years old. At 8, you believe instructions are promises. You believe adults return because they always have before. My mother leaned out the window, smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Let's see if she can find her way home." Then the car pulled back onto the road. I watched the taillights shrink until they were swallowed by the curve of the highway. The buzzing lights overhead grew louder. The night cooled fast. I waited. I counted the minutes by the click of the pump handles and the scrape of dry leaves skittering across the concrete. A man in a uniform wiped his hands on a rag and glanced at me once, then again, uncertain. I told him my mom was inside. That felt easier than the truth. The vending machine hummed beside me, soda cans rattling as if they were restless too. There are memories that drift in without asking. The smell of sunscreen from earlier that day. My mother's fingers tightening around the steering wheel when she was angry but pretending not to be. The way she liked to test people, small dares, quiet games, to see who would fail first. I didn't know then that I was the test. Hours pass differently when you're small. They stretch. They sag. The station emptied and filled again. Laughter came and went. A tow truck clanked somewhere down the road, metal on metal, a sound that made my chest jump. I pressed my hands into my pockets and practiced being still. I was already learning how. Eventually, a woman with a weak smile asked if I was okay. Her voice sounded careful, like she didn't want to scare me. I told her my address because I'd memorized it the way other kids memorized songs. She made a call. I watched the door swing open and closed, listened to the bell chime each time, wondered which sound would mean my mother had come back. He didn't. That night ended in a back seat with fabric that smelled like old coffee and rain. Red and blue lights smeared the dark. A clipboard. A blanket that scratched my chin. I kept expecting the door to open and for her to laugh and say it was a joke that went too far. Adults kept saying my name like it might anchor me. I never returned. Not to that gas station. Not to the house where silence had teeth. I learned new rooms and new rules. I learned how to pack light and listen closely. I learned how to be the one who doesn't need much. The one who figures it out. 18 years can make a life look neat from the outside. A job with regular hours. A small place that smells like clean soap and old envelopes. Mornings with weak winter light and evenings that settle quietly. I built something careful in mine. I didn't leave doors open. When they finally found me, it wasn't dramatic at first. Just a knock. Then another. Knuckles against wood, persistent, hopeful. I stood in my hallway listening to my own breathing, the tick of the clock loud in my ears. Outside, the porch light cast long shadows. Someone said my name like it still belonged to them. I didn't open the door. I watched the peephole darken and brighten as they shifted. 5 minutes is a small amount of time. Long enough to remember the smell of gasoline. Long enough to decide who you are now. Then the sound changed. Tires crunching at the curb. A radio squawk. Footsteps, measured and official, approaching the door. And with them came the weight of everything that had waited, patient and unfinished, just outside my life. The knocking didn't stop when the police arrived. It changed. Softer at first, then urgent again, as if volume alone could rewrite history. I stood with my back against the hallway wall, the wood cool through my shirt, listening to voices overlap outside my door. My mother's voice cut through the rest, higher than I remembered, threaded with something like panic. My father's followed, lower, practiced, the sound he used when he wanted authority to believe him. A police radio crackled. Shoes shifted on concrete. The porch light flickered, catching dust in the air. I closed my eyes and the gas station came back, uninvited. The buzz of fluorescent lights. The taste of pennies in my mouth from fear. The way I'd kept my shoulders squared because crying felt dangerous there. Memory doesn't ask permission when it returns. It just steps into the room and waits for you to acknowledge it. The officer knocked once, firm but respectful, and said my name. Not the shortened version my mother used when she was impatient. My full name. It landed differently. I stepped forward and opened the door just enough to see faces without letting anyone cross the threshold. They looked older. Smaller. Time had thinned them. My mother's hair was streaked with gray she hadn't earned while raising me. My father's posture sagged, confidence bent at the edges. Their eyes found me at the same time and I watched relief flash across their faces, quick, selfish relief like finding lost property. My mother reached for me instinctively. The officer stepped slightly between us, gentle but clear. Boundaries established without emotion. I hadn't realized how badly I needed to see that. They talked fast. Too fast. Words spilled over each other. Misunderstanding, lesson, discipline, searching, regret. My father said they thought I'd come home. My mother said she checked the road for hours. Both of them avoided the part where they drove away. The officer asked me if I knew them. If I felt safe. His voice was calm, grounded. I answered honestly. I said I hadn't seen them since I was 8. I said I didn't invite them. I said I'd built a life that didn't include surprises. My mother's face tightened like something inside her had slipped. She whispered my name again the way she used to when she wanted compliance. I felt the pull of it, the old gravity, but it didn't take. Another memory drifted in, quiet and sharp. Me at 10 learning how to sign my own forms. Me at 13 memorizing bus routes. Me at 16 realizing no one was coming to fix things. I had learned how to survive without witnesses. I didn't need to prove it now. The officer asked how they'd found me. My father hesitated, then admitted they'd hired someone. A service. Records traced, lines followed. 18 years of absence condensed into a few weeks of effort once guilt needed direction. The porch smelled like damp wood and night air. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and went quiet. I felt steady. Not numb. Just clear. I told the officer I didn't want contact. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. The words sounded strange but right, like saying your own name after a long time. My mother started crying then. Real tears this time. My father looked at the ground. The officer nodded, already understanding how this would go. He told them they needed to leave. They tried one last time. Apologies, explanations, the promise of talking later. I stayed quiet. Silence has weight when you choose it. As they stepped back into the dark, my mother turned and said she never meant for me to disappear. I didn't correct her. Some truths don't need help landing. They left behind the smell of damp coats and something older, fear maybe, that lingered on the porch after the police car pulled away. I locked the door and rested my forehead against it, listening to the quiet reassemble itself. The clock in the hallway ticked. A radiator hissed. Ordinary sounds returning to their places, as if the interruption had been brief and forgivable. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the small kitchen table with a glass of water I kept forgetting to drink, watching the streetlight paint and repaint the floor in pale stripes as cars passed. My phone stayed face down. I knew messages would come. They always do when people want something back. In the early hours, memories drifted through without asking. The gas station bathroom with its cracked mirror. The way I learned to read labels and prices like puzzles. The first foster home that smelled like cigarette smoke and bleach. The second one with the dog that followed me everywhere, loyal in a way that felt undeserved. Each place taught me something small and useful. Each place confirmed what I already suspected. I was the one who figures it out. By morning, the city sounded awake again. I showered, dressed, went to work. Fluorescent lights hummed. A coworker joked about coffee. I smiled when appropriate. It surprised me how intact everything felt, how the world didn't tilt just because the past knocked on my door. At lunch, my phone finally buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another. And another. I listened later, alone in a stairwell that smelled like dust and hot concrete. My mother's voice first, thin, pleading, stitched together with apologies that never reached the point. My father's after, measured, careful, outlining intentions like a proposal. They said they wanted to explain. They said they wanted to make it right. They said they'd waited 18 years for this moment. I thought about waiting. About how waiting feels when you're 8 and the lights are buzzing and the sky is going dark. About how waiting becomes a skill, then a reflex, then a scar. I deleted the messages. That afternoon a social worker called. Formal. She explained options, procedures, boundaries. She asked what I wanted. The question landed softly and stayed. No one had asked me that when I was small. I said I wanted distance. I said I wanted everything documented. My voice didn't shake. On the bus ride home, the city slid past in muted colors. Dry leaves scraped along the curb. Someone laughed too loud. I pressed my palm to the cool glass and watched my reflection blur and sharpen with each stop. There's a moment when you realize survival has been steering your choices for a long time. Not loudly, quietly, like a hand at the small of your back. Another memory surfaced. Me at 14 standing in a kitchen that wasn't mine, counting the number of plates in the cupboard before setting the table. Me at 17 learning how to leave a room before anyone asked me to. The habits were efficient. They worked. They also followed me everywhere. That evening there was a knock again. Not urgent this time. Measured. The officer from the night before stood outside with a folder tucked under his arm. Paperwork. A statement. He spoke plainly, respectfully. He asked if I was okay. I said yes, then corrected myself. I said I was handling it. He nodded like he understood what that meant. After he left, I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and let the quiet settle. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't forgiving either. I was standing in the middle of something, aware of how thin the line was between who I'd been and who I was becoming. I knew there would be another knock. Another attempt. The past doesn't give up easily. Circles patient. So did I. The weeks after blurred into something steady and deliberate. I changed my routine without announcing it. Earlier mornings, longer walks, lights off before midnight. The apartment smelled like clean soap and old paper, the comfort of things that stay where you leave them. I filed the paperwork the officer had given me and placed it in a folder at the back of a drawer. Not hidden. Just contained. I didn't hear from my parents again right away. When I did, it came in careful increments. An email from my father written like a memo, full of dates and intentions and apologies that read as obligations. A letter from my mother that smelled faintly of her perfume, words looping and uneven, asking if we could talk somewhere neutral. I read both once. Then I sat by the window and watched a weak afternoon sun slip between buildings, dust floating like it had nowhere else to be. I thought about the gas station. About how the lights buzzed and the night cooled fast. About how I learned at 8 that leaving can be framed as a lesson if you don't want to call it abandonment. The memory didn't hurt the way it used to. It felt distant, like a photograph you finally put back in its envelope. When I answered, it was brief and clear. I said I wasn't ready for contact. I said any communication would go through proper channels. I said I needed time measured in my terms, not theirs. The calm in my voice surprised me. Calm can be a form of strength when you've earned it. I leaned on the quiet support that had grown around me without spectacle. A neighbor who checked in without asking for details. A coworker who covered a meeting when I needed a morning off. A counselor whose office smelled like old books and tea who listened without trying to rewrite my story. Support doesn't have to be loud to be real. One evening, as rain streaked the window and the city softened into reflection, I realized something small and exact. I no longer felt like I was waiting. Not for an apology that would fix things. Not for an explanation that would make it make sense. Waiting had been a skill I learned too early. I didn't need it anymore. If you've ever been the child who learned to stand still so adults could decide what to do, you know how silence can become a second language. Some families don't lose children. They misplace responsibility. I still carry the past with me. I just don't let it drive. I lock my door at night and sleep through the ticking of the clock. I keep my lights low and my mornings slow. I choose who gets access to me and when. The world didn't end when I said no. It adjusted. The gas station no longer appears in my dreams. When it does cross my mind, it's only as a marker, where something ended and something else began. I didn't return because I wasn't meant to. I left because staying would have cost me myself. I turn off the lamp and let the room settle into shadow. Outside, a car passes, tires whispering on wet pavement. I breathe evenly. I'm not 8 anymore. I know my way home. I kept walking, not waiting.